Unless you have been living under a rock, I'm sure that you have heard that the United States has elected Republican Donald Trump to serve as our next president. And it's safe to say that people have mixed opinions on it. Welcome back, politics nerds, to the Politicast, a podcast dedicated to learning your policies like your ABCs. For those of you just joining, the Politicast is an educational podcast intended to educate young and future voters on government systems, current events, and the intricacies of the election system within the United States. Our goal is to increase voter turnout and interest in politics amongst the youth population in the US. So, without further ado, let's get into today's episode. Today's episode will cover the November of 2024 presidential election. More specifically, we will be talking about campaign strategy, finance, perception of each of the political candidates, and where Harris fell short and Trump pulled ahead. So, let's get into it. As mentioned, we will be talking about the election that took place less than 2 weeks ago in this United States. This election was a heated one, filled with unexpected dropouts and heated debates. But what really ended up getting us to this point? That's the question that we're going to answer today. Let's first break it down and talk about how the system works within the United States. Now, it works on an electoral college system. This means that within the state, the popular vote or the most popular candidate is the one that matters, meaning that in Washington, for example, if Kamala Harris received more votes than Donald Trump, she got the 12 electoral votes that belong to Washington. Essentially, whoever wins the popular vote in the state gets those electoral votes. It's somewhat of a compromise between a winner-takes-all system and a proportional system based on state representation. Now, a candidate needs 270 electoral votes to win the entire election. Now, I must mention that Nebraska and Maine are the two exceptions to this electoral college rule, as they have permission to split their electoral vote, and typically their vote is split, usually going 1 or 2 electoral votes to the Democrats. For example, in Omaha, in that area or district, the one electoral vote will typically go to a Democrat, and in Maine, 2-ish of the electoral votes will go to the Democrat, and the other just to the Republican candidate. Okay, so now let's talk about what happened before we got to Kamala Harris entering this year's political race. Now, Joe Biden and Trump were the two main candidates from each of their parties. Now, President Biden dropped out around late July. As a result of this, the Democratic Party had no candidate. Now, in this situation, there's a lot of controversy. Harris kind of just took over, almost, essentially for Biden. Now, this is a contentious move because through a few simple steps, she was able to obtain campaign funds from President Biden's campaign. And many right-wing individuals argued over how she, quote, is Biden or serves as a continuation to Biden. Now, obviously, this isn't true, as Vice President Harris is her own person. However, it was interesting to see her take over and the reactions to it as well. Despite attacks against her campaign, it was historic, and she was not only the first Black and Indian woman vice president, but she was the first to ever run for president as a Black and Indian woman. Now, let's get into how we got to Harris versus Trump. So, Harris, as we know, is associated with the Democratic Party, so she would be classified as a liberal when it comes to the policies and ideas she wishes to enact. Some example of policies that Kamala Harris prioritizes includes healthcare, which is expanding access to healthcare, climate change, basically taking aggressive action to stop the issue. She believes in criminal justice reform, which means legalizing marijuana and reducing racial disparities in the justice system, and gun control. As a note, I would classify her more on moderate on this gun control issue than other liberals, as she herself owns a gun. And despite that, she does argue that the amount of shootings that occur in the school system is obviously a big problem, and she does believe that gun control could be stricter. Conversely, Trump is associated with the Republican Party, so he would be classified as more conservative when it comes to policies and ideas. For example, he is big on immigration and limiting the amount of illegal aliens that enter our country. He's also big on foreign policy, the economy, especially reducing taxes. He is a big proponent of fracking, and typically the fracking happens in what we know as the Rust Belt part of the United States, which is actually where he got a lot of votes this time. Next, he's opposed universal health care, and he's a huge advocate for Second Amendment gun rights. Let's move on to the VP candidates in this race. Appointing a VP is critical in the campaigning process, as each president's vice president tends to compensate for something that they lack or have too much of. In any case, both Harris and Trump had to strategically choose their VPs, and at the same time, convince the public eye of them working together. Let's talk about Harris's VP first. Tim Walz. He is the governor of Minnesota. Some key ideas about him. He's a Democrat like Kamala, but he is white and he is male, which is a different demographic, making him appeal to maybe the more conservative liberals who support her. But more importantly, he is also aligned with what Harris supports, and his actions have also proved that through legislature and work he has done as governor of Minnesota. Let's move on to talking about the Republican vice presidential candidate, J.D. Vance. He is the senator of Ohio. Some key ideas. In my opinion, he's much more moderate than President Trump, and his wife, Usha Vance, is also very moderate, and in fact, she has sparked a lot of controversy around him in general because of her take on certain policies, and from people who I've conversed with, they think that J.D. Vance was a very interesting vice president choice for Donald Trump. He does give President Trump's campaign, in my opinion, a more balanced vibe than the more extremism that you would see, the more right-wingness that you would see on President Trump's campaign alone. Now, let's go into what really decided this election between these president and vice president campaign. So, what are battleground states? These are what decided basically our election in the United States. Now, if we look at some states on the electoral map, we know that they're guaranteed to swing a certain way. For example, historically, in the past few elections, California and Washington have consistently swung Democratic. Similarly, Massachusetts has swung Democratic. Another state that swings Republican pretty consistently could be Alabama or Florida. These are states that are consistent with they go. So this means that despite what campaigning is done in that state, it doesn't necessarily affect the outcome because the populous areas are so concentrated or may contain a lot of one certain voting ideology. So battleground or swing states are states that are likely to have a mixed turnout or something that's unpredictable to call based on polling. Now, in this election, these states were Nevada, Arizona, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, Wisconsin, and Michigan. Now, Trump clinched a clean sweep of all these states. That's really important to note, considering that the most money is spent within these states for campaigning. In Nevada, Vice President Harris spent tons of money on advertising on the sphere. However, she still lost that state. Similarly, in Pennsylvania, a huge state, tons of rallies, tons of advertisements, yet President Trump beat her in this situation. So, why did this happen? What was the more effective strategy? Now, Trump's successful campaign strategy in 2024 involved building a more diverse voter coalition than previously done in Republican campaigns, And he kind of reached more deeper into what you would see as a traditional Democratic demographic. He actually gained a lot of support of Latino and black men, and it kind of made him get more votes in those swing states. His campaign heavily focused on defacing Kamala Harris and Joe Biden's presidency and vice presidency, especially when it comes to economic concerns. In contrast, Kamala Harris heavily relied on her base. This means supporters she currently had, but also women. But she really struggled to broaden her appeal and gain that support in swing demographics, which is how Trump was able to pull ahead of her, despite her usage of the media, such as endorsements from popular celebrities, attending the Call Her Daddy podcast, and so on. However, she wasn't able to mobilize a voter base. In my opinion, her actions on Kamala HQ more appealed to my generation, Generation Z, which, yes, it's important to appeal to the future voters. However, I feel that not enough of our generation can vote. So it was weird to see so much targeted, outreach and voter outreach towards my generation specifically. Now, Vice President Harris's loss in the 2024 election also has some strategic and situational factors. Her campaign just struggled to address the economic concerns that President-elect Trump has successfully been able to kind of appeal to. At least he was telling the people what they wanted to hear. Now, Vice President Harris's focus on reproductive rights was a key issue for many, but it may not have resonated as strongly with swing state voters, especially those concerned about inflation and the economy. Additionally, President Trump's team capitalized on linking her policies to the Biden administration, which caused a lot of public frustration on key issues, making her lose some votes. Now, all things aside, President Trump has become our new president. So let's talk about what is going to happen as we go forward. So, a lot of people predicted about President Trump's second presidency will include a mix of economic, social, and foreign policy changes, largely kind of building off his first term. His approach will start with immigration reform, as that is one of his big priorities, specifically actions against illegal immigration and efforts to eliminate work permits for certain illegal groups. Now, in the role of tech moguls like Elon Musk and influencers amplifying his message, it's expected to continue to be crucial in his strategy. Now, this wasn't out when I was researching for this podcast, but recently he's been working to appoint his cabinet, and he's appointed two key figures, Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, two who are very influential. In fact, Vivek Ramaswamy was running for presidency until he later dropped out, which is important to note. These elements kind of point towards a nationalistic and an economically focused presidency with emphasis on traditional conservative values. Now, some of you may be happy to hear the outcome of these elections, and others of you may be disappointed. In an effort to stay nonpartisan, we would consistently like to relay information coming from both sides. But whether or not you're happy with these election results, I still highly recommend that you get involved with your local affinity groups to make a difference. If you are a Democrat, I recommend you join Young Democrats and Associated High School Democrats, and so forth. These two groups champion values held in the Democratic Party, and they may help you get the message out despite having a Republican president. If you're a Republican, I also recommend you join a Republican coalition or something of that sort where you are able to connect with people who are like-minded and can really make use of having a Republican as a president. I hope today's episode was really insightful and gave you more details into the election this year. I hope it helped you understand the process more. As always, make sure to follow us on social media and take a look at our link tree, which is now live in our Instagram bio. I can't wait to see you for another episode, and I hope you guys enjoyed this week's episode. Now into the fun trivia question of the day. Which president famously got stuck in the White House bathtub? A. William Howard Taft, B. Theodore Roosevelt, C. Franklin D. Roosevelt, and D. Andrew Jackson. Let me know your answer in the comment description below, and I will see you on the next episode.